Hello, everyone. Today we have another episode of Modern on a Budget. I actually might be shooting out a bunch of these videos today just to get content out. But today we're going to be talking about a deck that I love to hate, and that's probably true for most people. Infect. In case you don't know, Infect is a type of counter that a player can get. And if a player gets 10 or more, Infect deals damage and poison counters. And if a player gets 10 or more poison counters, they lose the game. So rather than having to deal 20 damage to your opponent, you only have to deal 10. And that can lead to some fairly interesting games, because you're just trying to play really tiny creatures that have Infect, and then swing in, and then instant speed pump up all of your dudes. Anyway, that's overall what the deck is. Usually when I try to make these budget decks, I have to decide, okay, am I going to cut from the land section, or am I going to cut from the non-land section? Because those are really the two big deciding factors in making a budget deck. But the thing about Infect is that you don't really have to do that. I did make one cut to an Inkmoth Nexus. I think my original list had more Pendlehavens, but it went up in price, so the deck went up in price, so I had to lower it back down. But I'll go over what all of these are, though, so don't worry about having to go pause it or whatever. But I had to make a few adjustments to the mana base, but the deck is basically the same thing. So, we have the creature base of the deck, and then the pump spells, and then we have the lands. And the lands really do matter in this deck. So we're going to start off with the creatures. We have Glistener Elf, which is a 1/1 for 1 with Infect. And the reason why that's so good in this deck is because it's right there, it's on turn 1, we need to just get rolling right away. Next is Blight Mamba. It's an Infect creature that you can regenerate. It is a 2-drop, but it's what we're gonna have to deal with. It also does allow us to keep it safe with regenerate. That way we don't just completely die to removal. Ichorclaw Myrrh is a 1/1 for 2. When it becomes blocked, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Now we have things that give trample in this deck, so that is very good. It also allows it not to get chump blocked and then die from a chump block most of the time. But these three creatures in combination are going to be our creature base for the entire deck. We don't even have any other creatures in the sideboard. First up on I'm going to bounce around the pump spells, possibly. The first pump spell, I'll just go down. The first pump spell we have is Blossoming Defense, and this is our one and only protection spell. The deck used to run a card called Apostle's Blessing, but this card pumps up the creature as well as giving it protection. So Blossoming Defense is going to give +2/+2 and hexproof, and that's going to protect our Infect creatures, as well as pumping them up. Groundswell is a 1 mana +2/+2 until end of turn, so it's kind of a bad Giant's Growth until you read the next part that says Landfall, it gets +4/+4. So it's 1 mana, 4 more Infect counters. Mutagenic Growth can be 1 mana or more likely 2 life. With Feraxia mana, you can pay 2 life or pay with a green, and it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Now what that's gonna do is that's gonna be able to just pump it for free so that you can go combo off even earlier in your turn in the game, because if you don't want to have to wait until you have like 4 or 5 mana. This just gives you a little extra speed. Scale up is the reason. Well, I'm sure it still can, but one of the bigger reasons why this deck can even win on turn 2. So it says, until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a green worm and has power and toughness 6/4. Now let's play it out like this. Turn 1, Glistener Elf. Turn 2, scale up into... I could even do a Groundswell and I would win the game. Or I could do a Blossoming Defense to give it Hexproof and do a Mutagenic Growth and I win the game. Vines of the Vastwood is a green with kicker green. Target creature can't be the target of spells or abilities. Oh, I forgot about this. This is also a way to protect your... I built this version of the deck and I forgot about some cards. I've made so many lists, I apologize. But this says, target creature can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control this turn. If it was kicked, that creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. So this is going to give you another way to protect your creature, but also a huge way to buff your creature as well, which is why the 2 mana is worth it. Next up is Become Immense. It's an instant speed pump spell, and it gives +6/+6. It is a 6-drop, but it has Delve, and with all the spells that you're casting to pump up your creature, you'll hit that threshold super easily. If you were to run a non-budget version of the deck, I would probably suggest running fetch lands or something just to increase the number of cards you can delve. And the reason why I did not include Evolving Wilds in this list, but you'll see I include it in a lot of other lists, is that this deck is trying to win on turn like 2 or 3. If it doesn't win on turn 2 or 3, you're probably screwed. But Infect, Delve, you're casting a bunch of pump spells, you should be able to cast it super easily. It's not naturally a 1-drop though, so that's why it's only a 1 of in the deck. Next up is Rancor. It's the card that gives Trample. It gives +2/+0 Trample, and if the creature dies, then you can just bounce it back to your hand. Season of Growth is a more recent inclusion and more of a fringe inclusion into the deck, but I really like this card, especially in this deck. It allows you to go a bit longer. If you need to go past that turn 2 or 3, this does it for you. It says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1, that doesn't really matter. Whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. Now that's really important, because sometimes you'll just be just out of range of lethal, and so you'll really need that. But those are the non-land cards of the main deck, and part of the reason that this deck can go longer, because you'll see it's a very low to ground, is Inkmoth Nexus. And you'll see this card is $50 for all 3 of them, but it's that good. It says, tap for a colorless or pay 1, Inkmoth Nexus becomes a 1/1 Blinkmoth artifact creature with flying and infect until end of turn. It's still a land. So it's a flyer, so that's evasion, and it's infect. And it's able to stay on the board. It's not going to get hit by conventional removal. So Inkmoth Nexus is going to be able to go in the air and get our opponents. And then we have Blinkmoth Nexus, if it'll hover over. Blinkmoth Nexus becomes a 1/1 Blinkmoth artifact creature with flying until end of turn. It's still a land. Tap, target Blinkmoth creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Now, this becomes a Blinkmoth, but so does Inkmoth Nexus. I know it says Inkmoth, but it's technically going to turn into a Blinkmoth creature. And so, that's going to be just another way to pump up our Inkmoth Nexus. Pendlehaven, target 1/1 creature gets +1/+2. Now, that's a 1/1, that's a 1/1, that's a 1/1. That turns into a 1/1. If you're in a really tight spot, I guess this turns into a 1/1 as well. But really, it's a way to just get that extra pump spell in case you don't have any in your hand. So that's the main deck. It's a fairly simple and straightforward deck. You're just trying to play down a creature, pump it up, and kill them. Autumn's Veil is a little bit of protection against blue or black spells. It's basically a budget Veil of Summer, just not as good. Gut Shot for removal, but without having to worry about spending mana so you can keep your pace. Nature's Claim in order to deal with pesky artifacts and enchantments. It doesn't matter if they gain life if you're dealing Infect. Weather the Storm, sometimes you just have to use Weather the Storm because you have to outpace the Storm deck. Dismember as extra removal with really minimizing how much mana you have to pay. And it also hits things that Gutshot won't. And Wild Defiance is whenever a creature you control becomes target of instant or sorcery spell, it gets +3/+3. This is for those like slower games where you know that you're not going to be able to just combo out so quickly. But like against control decks, you probably will be able to. But this is Infect. It's a very fast, very cheap deck. If you want to cut if you wanted to cut Inkmoth Nexus, the deck would be like $50 or $40 even. I would suggest having Inkmoth Nexus because it makes the deck so much more powerful. There's a reason why I'm running Inkmoth Nexus, but overall, this is a very budget, very powerful deck, and I think a lot of people just forget that this deck exists. Anyway, if you like the deck, comment below, like, subscribe. I will see you next Deck Tech.